All right, everyone, and welcome to class. So this entire module is about getting set up to write the code we're going to write for class. And we're really going to start writing code in module 2. This one is really just getting set up because it is a little more intricate than what you might have done in WNM 601. We're going to be using some tools called the terminal. We'll also be using a tool called Git. And there's some commands that we need to look at for each of those. And then we also actually have to install Sublime if you haven't used Sublime before. Most of you probably did. And set that up as well. That will be in the next videos that you'll see. But an overall, this video is about an overall view of what are some of these base tools that we're using, meaning terminal and Git. The next one will be a video will be about how to actually use Git. We're just going to talk about what Git is in this module. And then also what GitHub is, how you can sign up and where you go to get to GitHub and sign up for an account there. And then in the page after this one, pardon me, we will actually go ahead and install Sublime and some of the tools that go along with Sublime, and as well as FTP and things in that order. Because FTP will likely be doing something a little bit different than you did in 601. So cool. So we're going to start out with what the terminal is. Most of you are used to using your computer like this, right? Whether it be a Windows or a Mac computer, you have a desktop you go onto, you open files, you open folders, right? We're totally used to creating folders, opening folders, getting files that are inside the folder, working with them. That's something we're used to. At the base of a computer, though, everything is really text. What we see here is a visual display of all of that. And we still have access to that text version, right? And that's called the terminal. And the reason we're going to be using the terminal and not this interface that we see here, the desktop, which we still will use the desktop, but for certain things, we have to use the terminal. We just don't have a choice. And one of those things is Git. Git pretty much requires us to use the terminal. There are some other tools like GitHub Desktop and things in that order, but they're just a layer on top of the cake, and we really need to understand, for our purposes, a little bit of Git at the terminal level to be able to use it properly. So what is the terminal? Well, it is, like I said, just a command line interface. So I'm on Windows right now, but it's also on Mac. It's on every computer you'll probably ever use, but how you get to it is the question. So on Windows, you can go in, and if you go to, let's see here, there's a couple ways to get to it. You can go to right click on your start menu down here and go to run, and it'll open up a little window. And inside that window, you will type CMD. And as you can see here, we get this little black box that pops up with green text inside it. That is a terminal. That's one of the terminals on Windows. This is one that's absolutely fine. It works great. Oops, let me close this out. It works great. No issues with it. Then as you can see, it's got a little blinking cursor, and it's fine. It works fine. There is another version of the terminal on Windows that you can use as well, and that's called Windows Terminal. I like it a little better. It's up to you, whichever one you want to use. To get to Windows Terminal, you need to actually install it. And one way you can do that is by going to the Microsoft.com website. So if you just go to Microsoft.com and then you click on the search bar there and type in Windows Terminal, you'll see that one of the search terms right here is Windows Terminal App. You don't want the Windows Terminal Preview, you want Windows Terminal App. So if you click on that, I already have it installed, even though it says install open here. Don't worry about that, because it says I own it. It is a free application. It does not cost. You can go ahead and click install. It'll probably open the Windows App Store and have you install it, and you can install it that way. Then you would be able to find it in your start menu. I'm going to open it a different way. But as you can see, it is basically the same thing, except this is more powerful. So one thing you need to do if you're using this version of the Windows Terminal, now remember, you could go to run and just type CMD like we saw before here, and that would be fine too, and use that version of the terminal. But if you're using the one you downloaded from Microsoft, like that website, like I just showed you, you need to click on this little arrow that's pointing down, and type command, or not type, but select command prompt. You don't want Windows PowerShell and you don't want Azure Cloud Shell. You want command prompt, and you're gonna have to do that every time. Unfortunately, it's just the way it works, because the default one is the PowerShell one, and we don't want that. That's something else. So cool. On a Mac, on the other hand, terminal's already installed. So it's great. All you have to do is go, I've got some images here just because I happen to be on Windows right now. If you go into your app folder, you'll look for a utilities folder. So go into your apps, your app folder that you'll see on the side, go into your utilities folder, as you can see right here, and you'll see a terminal app. You can launch that, that's terminal. What you will get will be something very similar to what we see here. In fact, I have an image of it. And that's it. It's basically the same thing. You won't see all this uptime stuff. This is just me when I was doing the screenshot to show you that it does stuff. But it's basically the same thing. You'll see a blinking cursor, a black screen. Yours might be white. It might be a white background. That's fine. With black text, it doesn't matter what it looks like. So you'll be set to go if you're on a Mac. You just need to know where to get to it and to open it. Cool. So terminal has a number of different commands. Whether you're on the Mac terminal, on a Windows terminal, it doesn't matter. There's a number of different commands. Typically what it's going to do is open you up in your home folder. And your home folder is, you'll see here, it says users fmcha. That's because that's my username. And I'm Fred McHale, so that's my username. That's what I signed up with when I created my Windows computer, all of that. It created that for me. That's my home folder. So if you do this on a Mac, you open it up, you'll see you're in your home folder on your computer. It won't say C, it'll say it might say C actually, but it'll have forward slashes instead of backward, stuff like that. That's okay. But this is your home folder. What does that mean? That means that when you open up your Finder or your Explorer or whatever it is, whatever computer you're on, it'll take you into your main user folder where you'll see things like your documents and downloads and pictures and all sorts of stuff. That's what that folder represents. And you're going to hear the term directory and folder, they're kind of interchangeable here. They're the same thing. So if you hear me say directory, think folder. Cool. So that's what it does. Now, one thing to note, if you're not using Windows Terminal right here, or you're not using a Mac and using the Mac's terminal, and you do it the way I said on Windows, and you go to run and you type CMD and you see this, notice it's also putting you into your home folder. So you're set. Cool. So there are a couple useful terminal commands. I'm going to type one here, and I didn't put it on let's add it to my list right here. Let's do that right now. ls. ls stands for list. It lists everything you have. Oops, let me go back. I'm in the wrong thing here. Looks like I got a couple terminals open. So there we go. So let's make this bigger so we can see it, because I might not be able to see what I've been talking about. So as you can see, there's the home directory. You can see that right there a little easier now. So this command, if I type ls, it stands for list. Oops, not a record. That's because I'm in Windows. If you're in Windows, you have to type dir. Windows dir. And on Mac, the command is ls. Okay, so that's something to note. So if you're on a Mac, type ls. If you're on Windows, type dir. So clear does not work here. So dir, and that will list, as you can see, all the files and folders. You can see I have a desktop folder, downloads, documents, all sorts of stuff. And that's great. It's actually not one we're going to be using in this class, to be honest with you. But it's just something you might want to know. So either dir in Windows or ls on a Mac. This one that we're going to talk about next, CD, means change directory or change folder. And what that's going to allow us to do is go into a directory and change to it. So for example, when I listed this out, you saw that I have a desktop folder here. This is a folder because there's no file extension or anything like that. But how do I get to that from, let's do a different one. Let's do something like, documents. That makes more sense. Everyone's got a documents folder, so we'll do documents. Documents is a folder, right? And so how do I get to that from here? So whether you're on Mac or Windows, you typically go to your Finder or Explorer, go to documents, and then view all the files in there, right? How would you do this with a terminal? You type cd, change directory. So I would type cd. I saw that it's here, so I can type cd documents. And now notice this little thing here changed. It put me in the documents folder now. I'm no longer in the home. I'm in the home folder, which has a documents folder, and I'm in there right now. So if you did that on Mac, you would see the same thing. It would just, obviously, they would look a little different here because the way a Mac is set up. But now on a Mac, if you typed ls, you would see something different. I'm on Windows, so if I type dir, I'll see all the stuff that's inside my documents folder, right? Screenshots, taxes, all sorts of stuff. But again, on a Mac, you would type ls and you would see the same thing. So that's just a couple things that we see. There's another one we're going to use in the next video called move, and that's MV, and that allows us to move a directory from one area folder to another, or even a file. So we can move a file or a directory / folder, whatever you want to call it, to a different place. That's how we can move it. So notice when we move things visually, we're usually doing it by clicking document, or we're going into it, right? Say I want to take my WM 250 grades and put it in my work folder. I could just drag it over and that would be it, right? That moved it. This is the way we would do it. We'd use the MV command, and you'll see that in the next video when we use that. Cool. So the next thing we need to talk about is Git. So Git is it's a tool. And we're going to use it via the command line, so the terminal. You're going to hear the word terminal and command line interchangeably. But we're going to use Git. And Git is a tool that allows us to basically, it's called a version control system. And that version control system allows us to write code like we've always been doing. No different there. That's always the same. But it allows us to share that code with other people who may want to write it. In some cases, when we're not sharing it with other people, but it just allows us to have a central place to write our code. So that's going to be important because that means that it's no longer just on our desktop. There'll be a backup someplace, which is really useful. And then if you wanted to share that code, you could then go ahead and they could use Git and download the code, make changes, upload it. You could make changes, upload it, and it would help you with all the different things that happen with that. Because there could be times where you have conflicting code and all sorts of stuff, and Git can help with that. We're not going to go into that portion of it, but what we are going to use Git, is you'll see as we move throughout the class, is to upload our code and just get used to using Git because it's such a heavily used tool. So I have an image here, and let me make it a little bigger. So Git, again, allows you as the developer, the designer, whoever, to have what's called a local repository on your machine. And what that means is that you're going to get from a main repository some code, and you're going to download it or clone it, right? You're going to clone it onto your computer into a local repository, meaning your computer. And so what that allows us to do is have a copy of it, and then we'll make some changes, and then we'll push it back up to the main repository. And then that main repository will be different. Someone else could do the same. They could download it, make some changes, push it back up to the main one. And that's the main idea of Git. It's called a distributed version control system. Now, again, in our case, we're just going to be one person doing it, but in the next video, you're going to see where you're going to use GitHub to fork a project, and then you'll make changes to it, so on and so forth. And that's how you'll write your code from now on. So that's the idea of Git, though. You have a main repository somewhere out. In our case, it's going to be somewhere out on the internet. It's going to be on a place called GitHub. And then you'll download that and clone it onto your computer, which will be called a local repository, and you'll make the changes there and then push those back up to the main repository. Cool. That's the idea of Git. So it's no longer just on your computer or your server. Cool. So how do we do that? Well, one, you have to install Git. So installing Git is pretty straightforward. You just go to the Git website, which is https://git-scm.com. And then down here, you'll see what's called the latest resource release, and you can click download whatever the version number is at the time you watch this video. And I'm on Windows right now, so it'll say for Windows. You might see it say for Mac if you're on a Mac. And then you go ahead and download it. It gives you a program to download. You double click on it and install it. So for example, I would just click it, it will download it. It's taking me, oh no, it did download it. So you can see down here, it downloaded it in my browser. I'll click on that and install it. And then you go ahead and install it. So again, that's on Mac or Windows. So you'll be good to go. And then what you need to do to use Git, well, actually, you might need to restart your computer. So just be aware of that. I've actually had that occasion. If you are having other problems once you've installed it and you see weird errors, let your instructor know, because it might just be the way your computer's set up. But first things first, go ahead and download it and install it. Cool. So from there, we talked about what Git is in its simplest form. You go ahead and install Git on your computer, and just do that through the Git website. And then there are useful Git commands. And so let's look at that. I'm going to go ahead and open up my terminal again. And let's see if that does, yeah, there we go. So whether you're on Mac or Windows, again, does not matter. Git will be installed and you'll be good to go. And you can check that by typing Git, no matter where you are, right? So in this case, I'm not in my home directory anymore. I'm in the documents directory inside of my home directory. It doesn't matter. You can just type git -- version. And notice it says git version 2.28.1.windows.1. And so that means I have Git installed because it gives me the version and I'm set. There are Git commands, and we're going to talk about those commands in the next video, and previous videos as we move on, like git add and git commit. And but what those do is allow you to work with your files that you create, and then be able to actually use them, or pardon me, push them up to GitHub, the repository. And that's probably the most important part for us, is going to be pushing them up to GitHub. So in the next video, watch for that, because you'll start that process. Cool. So the next thing we need to do is go to GitHub. So if you just type in GitHub, and I'm probably already signed in, so I'm gonna have to sign out. Yeah, let me sign out. So we'll sign out. GitHub is going to be our repository. There are a number of ways to create repositories for Git, and one of them is using GitHub. It'll store your repositories for you. There are other places. There's something called GitLab and Bitbucket and a whole bunch of different ones. GitHub is one of the most popular ones and the ones used by a lot of companies and a lot of free projects, right? So it's just one of the more popular ones. You go ahead and sign up, and you'll enter your username, password. You'll want to remember that, right? All of those things. It might actually log me in by default. And go ahead and create an account. So that's the first thing you need to do. Just create an account, and then once you've done that, you'll be good to go and move on to the next video, where we'll use GitHub to what's called fork a repository, and then we'll clone that repository we forked to our local machine, and then we'll be able to make changes to a file and then push those back up to our local repository.